Welcome, everyone, to today's Fireside Chat. My name is Craig Yee. I'm the Chief Customer Officer of OpenEnvoy, and we're pleased to talk today with Van Truman. He's the VP of Finance at Raney's. I'm going to let Van give you guys all a quick introduction.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for inviting me to your fireside chat. I appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Van Truman. I'm Vice President of Finance for Raney's LLC. We are a private equity-backed company, have been since 2021. We fashioned ourselves a platform company and have executed on a number of acquisitions over the past couple of years. I think we are at 7 in total now, poised to execute on another one here over in the next couple of months. But my entire career has been spent in the manufacturing and distribution space, anywhere from publicly traded Fortune 500 companies all the way through to startup venture capital firms. So I've had a variety of experience, but most recently, since 2019, that experience has been almost exclusively in the private equity-backed space.
Great, thank you. One thing for our audience today, you are actually kind of one of our more current, more recent members of our customer community, finance executives. I think that's important to share a little bit of your background. You walked into Raney's with a pre-existing AP AI automation solution. Tell us what was that like walking into an organization that already had a solution in place?
Not a lot of expectations. I wasn't part of the implementation process that had happened prior to my arrival to Raney's. And my background, included a broad, variety of various ERP solutions, including 2 or 3 that I was either drove the implementation or was part of the implementation. So I didn't have, and up to this point, up to joining Raney's, I did not have actually any experience or exposure to AI-backed tools like OpenEnvoy for driving efficiencies within the accounting processes. Kind of a, maybe a bit of skepticism coming in, with what was described to me, how the tool works and operates. Once now that I'm plugged in and pretty thoroughly immersed in the tool, pleasantly surprised. Had not anticipated that it would deliver on the elements that my history or my exposure required labor intensive efforts, if you will.
That's interesting. You talk a little bit about the expectations. Maybe you can talk to the audience a little bit about the challenges and staffing in your experience for AP automation, and then maybe provide a little context of how AI kind of, supplements or helps, alleviate some of the kind of human burden in that area.
Sure. So Raney's is in the e-commerce space. Think of it in terms of perhaps Amazon. And there are literally thousands of transactions that occur on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. My AP team today consists of 3 full-time individuals, and I'm sorry, 4 full-time individuals and 1 part-time individual. And given the number of transactions that are processed by OpenEnvoy and the number of transactions that the AP team then has to touch because either they can't fully execute or there's some other issue which we want to call out due to some sort of discrepancy or some sort of conflict, my team would easily have to probably triple, maybe even 4 times the current size if we were processing that same volume, from a kind of a legacy standpoint where I've got an AP clerk, she's doing the 3-way match, she's reviewing pricing, and addressing any conflicts with the various stakeholders.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier that you guys are growing through acquisition, including one that you're looking at that would double your size. So you've gone through significant growth. What about the efficiency that you've kind of experienced? I know you talked about headcount avoidance, but you've been able to scale. What other things from an efficiency standpoint have you noticed?
So generally speaking, when I look at the planning or financing from a legacy perspective, this is one of those costs I would consider variable. As those transaction counts increase, I've got to leverage up and add headcount. I've discovered that's not really the case with the utilization of OpenEnvoy. It's more about how we are engaging with our supply chain and plugging them into this environment than it is about, okay, do I need to add another head count to address that volume. To your point, you mentioned a pending acquisition we're looking at that would probably come relatively close to doubling the size of the organization. At this point, I have no plans to add headcount because I anticipate that I can route the vast majority, if not maybe all, of that additional supply chain content through OpenEnvoy.
Yeah. And in the past, I know some of this may predate you, but you have been there for over half a year. Can you talk a little bit about how the strategy is for folding in new incumbents? Oh, sorry, new acquired companies as you guys scale and grow?
Sure. So past experiences with M&A activities required a number of things that would burden what I would call burden the P&L and L and balance sheet. One of those is when an acquisition happens, you're never so lucky as to get a target acquisition that is sitting on the same ERP solution as you are currently running, right? And without tools that are kind of plug and play, we end up um, going through a months long, sometimes years long transition process to move that environment or integrate that environment with the acquiring company's host ERP, which means I'm still carrying costs to support that environment. I'm still
Mhm.
carrying costs to execute or operate within that environment from a finance perspective. And I'm not able to, address any of those, what I would normally consider redundancies in our processes.
Yeah. I see. What about you talked a little bit about the integration and, there's always post-merger integration. What about the plug and play kind of aspects of using, a basic infrastructure like AP automation or OpenEnvoy in this case?
Sure. And that's one of the things that, I mentioned earlier, about not really having any preconceptions about what I was walking into with AI and maybe even being a little skeptical about what the deliverables would be. But given that, the tool, it basically consists of, as far as the exposure of the tool, an email account, really. So, which a lot of companies use already. So they're directing their supply chain to submit communications and or invoicing to a specific email account. We're doing the same thing here. So there's no coding or IT support on both ends of that transaction, either with the vendor or with us as the buyer. That needs to happen, and that means my learning curve is essentially nil. We can plug in we can plug in a vendor, hand them an email account, and start utilizing OpenEnvoy right away with essentially no learning curve.
Yeah. And so I think our audience is probably interested in saying, okay, how adaptable and flexible, this won't mean anything to the audience yet, but there is something that we know as the Grand Rock Rule. Something that was done specifically for Raney, as it's a kind of a cute name, but maybe you can describe for the audience what that is and how it kind of helped you through one particular
Sure.
situation.
Sure. So our standard automation, the core of our standard automation with respect to matching and coding uh, purchase order based vendor invoicing is a three-way match. Very standard. Whether I'm running behind an AI tool or running legacy systems, and that's where we're matching contracted pricing to a PO to an invoice. And what we had discovered is we were spending an inordinate amount of time with, in this case, a particular vendor, hence the name Grand Rock Rule, who was a high volume vendor, primarily because we carried very little stock with them. All the transaction was drop shipped. So every time an order was placed, it was drop shipped directly from the vendor to the customer, and that generated its own invoice, right? And we were constantly in pricing negotiations with this vendor as well. So what was happening is the rate card, which is one of the matching elements within OpenEnvoy, would never match the PO, would never match the invoice. However, our PO, which is a legal document, did match the invoice. So we created this rule primarily for Grand Rock, although we had a handful of other vendor accounts who modeled the same type of behavior, to basically cut out the rate card match element, because that was always a lagging element. That one still has a human element to it. It's simply because our procurement team can't keep up with the pricing changes that happen with that particular vendor. So we do just a two-way match. We do a PO to invoice match with Grand Rock, and like I said, these other handful of vendors, and they are tied to that specific rule. So again, I think it's the flexibility within OpenEnvoy, where it's not kind of a one size fits all or kind of cookie cutter rule application, that allows us to use it in a way that best fits Raney's, in order to achieve the throughput, the efficiencies, and risk avoidance that we want to achieve.
Great. That's great for the audience to understand. I kind of want to shift a little bit now. We talked about some of the operational efficiencies. We talked about the headcount savings, the merger and acquisitions. What about from a PE lens, the focus, and I think the audience will understand this, the focus on the financials, like the performance and improvements in EBITDA and other financial metrics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, as with pretty much any private equity backed company, once that acquisition is closed, we're looking to um, optimize our bottom line, optimize EBITDA. Private equity likes to focus on EBITDA or adjusted EBITDA, and a lot of the drivers there are not only top line revenue, but also our overhead cost. And particularly in the M&A space, I mentioned before some of the redundancies that occur along the road with those acquisitions. What's key is to locate, find, and reduce or consolidate those redundancies as quickly as possible. So, harkening back to my comments about the plug and play and zero learning curve capabilities of OpenEnvoy, there's other pieces in place. So, some of the common metrics in a finance space environment are cost per invoice processed, or the competitive terms advantages, when I speak of like net 30 or net 45.
Mhm.
um so when we go through it, one of the things that OpenEnvoy allows us to do is quickly and easily, one, identify where we have redundancies in our supply chain as a result of an acquisition, and optimize both terms and pricing as that are stemming from those redundancies. Two, again, because I find that I don't really need to add headcount, as long as I'm able to keep the automation in place. I can optimize my processing cost per invoice. So it doesn't matter that, okay, I've got 10,000 transactions flowing through or 20,000 transactions flowing through. I'm I'm maintaining an overhead cost relative to that number of transactions from a labor standpoint
Mhm.
that's constant.
Right. So you see those metrics improve just as volume increases, right? Those particular ones.
Exactly.
What about, just to tag on a little bit, you know, I think one of the benefits you and I have talked about is kind of the collection of additional data, right? Not just the invoice or purchase order, but a kind of a collective data set that you're able to use to kind of drive insights to improve your performance. Is there anything that, you particularly notice, or things that you're particularly keen on drawing out of a platform like OpenEnvoy to be able to improve your operations?
Sure. One that kind of stands out to me, and is particularly, kind of burdensome, often towards the end of the year, or if there's, if you're working with a lending institution and trying to provide, some audit documents, is how OpenEnvoy handles what I like to call big data, right?
Mhm.
So in past environments or legacy environments, you're archiving those invoices, oftentimes physical copies of them, right?
Mhm.
And you've got storage solutions, you've got on-site solutions, off-site solutions. Doing any kind of call for those documents is an involved process that maybe involves a third party and time. Well, within the Open Envoy environment, I can, in a matter of really seconds, call up an invoice, walk it all the way back from the charge account or the vendor, call up an invoice, and for any period of time during which I've been using the tool, and you know, and be able to look through that, see an actual rendition, digital rendition of that invoice, any notes that were attached to that invoice as it was being processed, and quickly respond to inquiries from an audit team, year-end audit, or financing institution, in whatever capacity they might be looking for.
Right. Okay. Yeah, pivoting just a little bit from the performance and kind of coupling that with financial improvements. What about some of the AI, we'll call AI-driven improvements, things around accuracy, fraud, um, overbillings, those types of things? What have you come across in your time with Raney's and OpenEnvoy?
So I think one of the things that are advantageous, particularly when we're talking about, reams and reams of data in terms of the transactional or invoice level data that comes across, is the ability to summarize that and look for deviations that may be maybe an alert or a flag, with a particular vendor, with a particular routing. Um, One of the things I use the Open Envoy for today is to summarize transactional level data to say, okay, I've processed X number of transactions for ABC vendor. With those transactions, there's I'm seeing a total of, Y in overbillings or Z in underbillings. And while we're constantly, some of those are approved, some of those may not be, but what I'm keying in on in my vice president capacity are more material deviations. I expect to see some of these, and I expect over time that they stay constant as far as a trend or a ratio against against the total dollars processed. But if I see spikes or I see something that's material, unanticipated, can't be explained, that's an
Mhm.
instant red flag for me, and cause for me to investigate further.
Interesting. Yeah, you bring up a point that I want to double click on. There is a difference in roles, right? Like you just explained a little bit more about the finance executive role and what you're looking for. Maybe, and I know you don't work in the tool the same way your team does, but maybe you can give a little bit of perspective on kind of the different users, you being one, which you just shared, but also maybe from your team.
Sure. So we've got, what I would call, my frontline user. That's my accounts
Mhm.
payable clerk. Um, they are assigned a slate of vendors, if you will, but the tool Open Envoy will, based on the rules that we've assigned to those vendors, go through and do automatic matching processes. If
Mhm.
there are no conflicts that that exhibit during that matching process, it'll flow right through to our ERP and approve for processing and remittance, right? The clerk doesn't have to get involved at all. Where they do get involved and where they insert themselves into the process, if based on, again, on the rules that are in place, a conflict presents that needs a resolution. It might be pricing, it might be terms, it might be a change in the vendor that's unanticipated, or it might be, occasionally we'll get invoices that the vendor is unassigned,
Mhm.
and I'm set up as kind of we call it default. So if a procurement adds a new vendor, and they don't advise the accounting team appropriately, it will actually kick back to myself so that I can say, okay, we've got a new vendor. I need to make an assignment. I need to actually talk with procurement, understand, what was negotiated with this vendor and how we need to set them up in our system. So that way we don't get surprises, like
Hmm.
I've seen with some of our acquisitions who may not be as adept or in the 21st century, if you will, as some of as we are, and we see some pretty material and significant surprises that way. And I just don't get those within our current environment.
Yeah, you also touched on the idea of like audits and compliance. Um, OpenEnvoy does provide a comprehensive audit trail. Maybe you can talk about how you leverage that and how that kind of helps inform your business um, when it comes to AP processing.
Yeah, so aside from, like a general year-end type audit or tax audit, it also gives me, back to the reports I was talking about before, when there is a variance that, I think throws a flag that I need to investigate. Each transaction or each job with an open envoy carries an audit trail with it that tells you exactly what happened at every step along the way within that job. So I can see, if there was a change to a PO that was approved or authorized by someone within our procurement team. And so, okay, and my AP clerk recognized that, saw that, and that's why it got approved and moved forward with within the manual matching process. Or I can see where, okay, wait, they approved it, but they didn't engage with my procurement team. And
Hmm.
so I need to understand what happened there. So it's not only an internal, or rather, it's not only an external, fail safe
Hmm.
or risk aversion mechanism. It's also internal as well, in that it alerts me to where the appropriate steps that have been, are part of our standard operating procedure, part of our standard work, were not followed in resolving any conflicts within the environment.
Right. Yeah. So visiting a minute on the workforce and the team and kind of the knowledge and experience. I think you've described before tribal knowledge, what's held within kind of separately among the people who've been there some time. Um, how did you, how do you feel like this solution was able to kind of address some of those? I mean, you mentioned the fact that, if it wasn't for this Open Envoy, you'd probably need 3, 4 times as many people. How do you
Right.
actually de-risk yourself from some of this tribal knowledge? I know one is reducing the size, but what have you seen to date in your time with Rainey's?
I think the big one actually is simplification, process simplification.
Hmm.
And to the degree that, whether it's an acquisition or whether it's internal, that we can make the process as simple, straightforward, and automated as possible. One, that addresses, the addition of labor that we would otherwise have to employ. But two, it mitigates that risk of having that tribal knowledge. There's, with Open Envoy, very simple to install, very simple to implement, and very simple to execute.
Hmm.
So there, I can, if I had one of my clerks, decide that she was going to leave tomorrow, or he or she was going to leave tomorrow, I could get somebody back in that team and, up and running and competent in the environment in just a matter of days.
Yeah, that's impressive. Um, just switching a little bit now to the executive view. Um, we talked about some of the future benefits and a little bit how you leverage the data, but what about KPIs and how you use that to manage the operations?
Sure. So specifically, there's been a couple KPIs that I've introduced, since I've been able to, have access to the tool. I mentioned big data before, and it's a rather convoluted process from a legacy environment to develop a KPI such as, transactions processed or invoices processed, because when I'm simply looking at invoice count, one invoice may not resemble another. One invoice maybe
Hmm.
has 50 line items and the other one has a single line item.
Hmm.
But I can get an extra level of granularity and detail with an OpenEnvoy that tells me, okay, this my AP clerk and over here has 30 vendors assigned to him or her, and of those number of transactions processed, I can see the distinction between those that were processed using the tool and there was no manual intervention because everything matched according to the rule, and those where there was some type of manual intervention and exactly what that manual intervention was.
Hmm.
So I can, I've used that, and actually, probably 3 or 4 months ago, have actually started posting that. It's kind of a
Hmm.
dashboard for my AP team to,
Right.
gauge where they, on a month. Actually, I publish it weekly to gauge on a weekly basis how they're, how they're executing. You
Hmm.
can see trends and movements, between the operator and over time.
Yeah. And as you think about the future, and I think putting again, reminding the audience that you walked in with the solution already in place, so you have a head start. How do you see using AI as kind of a, we'll call it strategic asset? What lies ahead, and as you tune this model and look kind of to the future?
Well, I think where we get the best, bang for the buck, if you will, is how we are able to engage OpenEnvoy with our acquisitions. We are a bias to action company. I mentioned we've had 7 acquisitions over the last 24 months, and poised to do another one, and I expect to continue because that's what that's we're looking at both organic growth and M&A growth, and to the extent that we can quickly plug in an acquisition within within their supply chain within this AI tool, we generate the cost reductions and the benefits of that tool almost from day one, right?
Hmm.
Because it really takes next to nothing to route that supply chain over to an email. That's really essentially at the end of the day, that's the change that's made.
Yeah,
And as we all know, that change can be it's a matter of minutes to make that kind of change.
right. And you're talking about like any, we don't require any vendor setup. There are no portals or templates to set up. And so
Right.
from the appearance from the vendor's perspective, nothing changes. Everything
Exactly.
stays the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's that I think that's I'm sure a lot of the audience might be familiar with terms like EDI. So that's
Mhm.
from where I sit, one of the readily observable advantages to companies where I think that was probably the evolution that happened between everything being touched manually to an AI tool like OpenEnvoy, is we had this there's EDI plugin, but to support that plugin, there's a IT resource on both ends of that equation.
Right.
There's efforts made around coding and matching and testing that
Hmm.
just aren't present within OpenEnvoy.
Great. I'm sure the audience appreciates that perspective. Well, I did kind of want to wrap things up. I think we wanted to take one question that hasn't been answered through, fairly comprehensive discussion today. And that is, what's the biggest surprise when walking into an organization that had an existing AI AP automation solution?
Wow. So I want to answer that by saying this. So until Rainey's, I didn't have any exposure to AI tool like OpenEnvoy. I've had a pretty lengthy career. Much of that career probably spent mostly within kind of legacy ERP systems where a human was manually assessing and evaluating and analyzing transactions to make sure that they aligned with contractual rules. Um, so having come from that and then walking into an environment where it's I'm told, okay, yeah, we have an AI tool called OpenEnvoy that basically automates our AP process. There's little human intervention. I will say I was a bit of a skeptic, maybe more than a bit of a skeptic. But I will say that I've been here since February, but it didn't take me long to recognize that okay, yeah, it's this tool. I don't have any idea how it works. I'm not a IT engineer, but somehow this tool is able to, essentially read emails and read content like a human might, and make those matches that a headcount or FTE would otherwise make, but I don't have to make that investment within with a human element. Well, I would also say there's, you have that element of, that risk element of a proneness to error. I mean, we're all
Mhm.
human, we make mistakes. As opposed to an automated tool that's following a set of rules, and it's the rules that really are guiding what it does. So I
Right.
would say that's probably the biggest eye opener for me walking into an already established environment like that.
Great. Well, Van, I think that's our time here. So number one, thank you very much, not just for participating in today's session, but really being part of the OpenEnvoy customer community. It's through you that, all of our success, collective success is coming.
Thank you.
And so I want to also thank the audience for participating. You can, again, see bits of this on our site. Will be able to repurpose this and kind of share this information with the audience in general. So many are going to be benefiting from the insights that you provided today. Thanks, everybody. That's it.
All
Have
right.
a great
Thank you,
rest of the
Greg.
day. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.